What we're talking about now is opening up an entirely new frontier in a completely untested techniques with completely unknown impacts to humanity. And we feel that that's a red line. We don't need to cross that line.
Welcome to Facing Future. The majority of life on our planet is in the ocean. It produces more oxygen and stores more carbon than any other place on Earth, and is home to an amazing array of bioluminescent sea creatures and life forms that we know little about. Our climate depends on ocean currents propelled by upwelling from the deep sea. We damage it at our peril. The discovery of small, basically irreplaceable nodules containing cobalt, manganese, nickel, and lithium, which took millions of years to form, has companies and nations vying for mining rights to take millions of tons of these materials from the deep sea. The intrusion of heavy equipment and the resulting plumes of debris has been shown to destroy marine life and permanently damage the seafloor. The all-electric future many dream of is mineral-hungry, but at what cost to the environment? With me today to discuss this issue are Arlo Hemphill, Greenpeace USA's Oceans Are Life lead campaigner, and climate scientist Paul Beckwith. Welcome to you both.
Hi.
Thanks for having us.
Arlo, what can you tell us about your campaign?
The Greenpeace Stop Deep Sea Mining campaign believes that there is no place for deep sea mining as a new extractive industry in the global oceans. The places that we're talking about are miles deep at some points. Very little is known about these places or how they interact with the rest of the ocean, including the carbon cycle. The race to accumulate critical minerals that countries are going through right now does not require opening up a new extractive industry that has the potential to decimate within the first decade a swath of the seafloor the size of the continental United States, of which we know nothing about. And so while there's a lot of aspects of the campaign that deal with recycling and circular economy and alternatives to the way we're going, our main thrust of the campaign is to ensure that we do not get to the commercial stage of this industry. We have a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to stop a new extractive industry before it starts. This would be like going back in time and stopping the first offshore oil rig from ever going out to sea before that ever got started. And once this industry starts, you're dealing with a completely different challenge of reeling in and making an industry more sustainable, when right now in history, we have the opportunity to let it not even begin.
I understand that some octopus and other creatures actually use these nodules that are so mineral rich to lay their eggs.
Yeah, the nodules that you're referring to in the Clipperton and Clarendon zone are actually the only substrate in the ecosystem. And substrate is often the center of an ecosystem. When you think about the coral reef, it's the habitat. When you think about the rainforest, it's the trees. So in the case of these polymetallic nodule fields, there's nothing else out there but the nodules. So the nodules form the basis of life, where you have sessile organisms that attach to them, and things such as sponges and anemones that attach through their entire life cycle. And yes, there's something called a ghost octopus that uses these nodules to attach their egg sacs, and they're a critical part of the life cycle. Without these nodules there's nothing to attach the eggs to. The octopus could likely go extinct because there isn't an alternative that they could use.
Now, do these nodules, I think it takes literally thousands or even millions of years for them to form, and they're formed from the seawater itself, precipitation of the materials from the seawater. Can you expand on, is that correct, that view? Or?
Yeah, so it takes millions, and it is basically minerals precipitating out of the water. There are different forms of mineral deposit, I should clarify first, and the nodules are not the only one that deep sea mining companies are going after. It's the one they're going at first, but they're really looking at all the various types of mineral deposits that are in the ocean, and some of them would require much more invasive techniques, and they're all on the table right now. But in terms of the nodules, basically what happens is you get something like a shark tooth. A shark swimming above in the water column loses a tooth, it falls down into the deep seabed, and over ages and ages and ages, it serves as like a magnet for these minerals to accrue to. And it slowly grows to like a softball-sized rock over millions of years. The same exact process happens on the side of seamounts where you do have exposed rock. And so you get mineral crusts that are actually almost the same composition as the nodules, but in a different form. You have them in a crust form because they're building on the side of a rock instead of on a seashell or a shark's tooth.
Now, we know that the seafloor has been scoured by different fishing methods, like where they put weights on the nets and they drag them across the bottom, basically scouring the seafloors. I think there's some studies showing how detrimental that is to the ocean ecosystem, right? So can you maybe talk a bit more about what we do know? I know seafloors off Asia, for example, are pretty much devoid of life because they've been scoured by this bottom trawling. So, I mean, can you tell us a bit more about that, maybe?
There's shallow water trawling and there's deep sea trawling. Shallow water trawling, a common example is the shrimp industry, where you're dragging these nets along the surface of the seafloor in order to mass catch amounts of your target fishery. One thing, you're destroying the seafloor. In the case of shrimp, there would be areas of seagrasses, of sponge groves, of small corals that are just annihilated by these nets. And in the case of places where they've been doing this for decades, that happened decades ago, and there's no recovery. In addition to that, it's an indiscriminate form of fishing. So you're basically just catching anything the net comes across. And in some cases, you've seen there's something called bycatch. It's things that you weren't going after. And in cases of some shrimp fisheries, you'll get 9 pounds of bycatch to every pound of shrimp. So for every pound of shrimp, which was the thing they were looking for, you got 9 pounds of sea turtles, of crabs, of bottlenose dolphins, of other fish that you just weren't looking for. And in most cases, if it's a commercial industry, they have no way to deal with it. So it's just overboard with the dead bodies. In the case of deep sea bottom trawling, which has targeted largely seamounts, which are underwater mountains in the middle of the ocean that have vast coral groves growing up the side of them, but they're miles deep. They use trawls that are sometimes as large as 2 American football fields in diameter, with huge, heavy wheels that roll these things up the side of these underwater mountains, essentially crushing everything in its way in order to catch fish such as orange roughy and Patagonian toothfish are examples of fish that they would be going after with that tactic.
Well, the mining is a new wrinkle. We already have the fishing problem, which is, as you say, the genie's already out of the bottle, and now we're trying to backtrack to try to control some of that damage. But how much of the mining has actually started?
So there has been no commercial mining as of yet. There's been a number of test mining, including one last year that I believe, don't remember the exact number offhand, but I believe it was 13,000 tons of polymetallic nodules. I would have to double check the figure, but basically it was a test of commercial mining. So they were acting as if they were on a commercial venture in order to test the machinery and the impacts of the machinery. And then they actually took the nodules, and they still hold the nodules today, and they're doing processing tests with those nodules now. But as of yet, deep sea mining is not legal anywhere in the world. There was a venture that started in 2008 where a Canadian company went into Papua New Guinea, got a license from Papua New Guinea, and planned to mine off the coast of Papua New Guinea. They experienced fierce resistance from the locals who lived right on shore from where this mining would have occurred. And between that and investment difficulties in gaining the capital, the project eventually collapsed. There are 2 countries right now that are actively looking at mining in their own waters, and that is the Cook Islands and Norway. But they're both in the exploration phase where they have vessels going out and doing studies, including potentially extracting minerals, but for exploration purposes, not to sell them. And then the rest of the emphasis right now is in international waters, and that's where the big debate is happening right now. And there's an agency that's associated with the UN called the International Seabed Authority, who's under the law of the sea, it has been mandated to regulate the deep sea. It has a mission to both protect it, but also to regulate a future deep sea mining industry. And it has issued dozens of licenses for exploration all across the Central Pacific. basically covering an area almost the size of Canada with these license areas. But at this time, the activities happening in those license areas have been exploratory, not commercial.
I read there was one test in Japan. It was a long time ago, I think 1989 or something, where they actually did some sort of a test and discovered that it took 20 years later or something, the seabed has still not recovered. And there was a big drop in the fish and the shrimp in the area for quite a long time. And it's only now that the transition to a green economy has its really dark side. Of course, it'd be better not to go to EVs. It would be better to go to trains, but people are going to go to EVs. Would it be better to improve mining methods on land so that they're not as destructive? Is there any way to do that? Or what other possibilities exist to draw attention away from the deep sea?
Greenpeace does not advocate land-based mining either. And we acknowledge that there are a number of environmental and social issues surrounding land-based mining around the world, depending on the particular mine and method. But it is a tested form of industry where what we're talking about now is opening up an entirely new frontier in a completely untested techniques with completely unknown impacts to humanity. And we feel that that's a red line. We don't need to cross that line. To answer the other side of your question, yes, there are a number of things that we can do to lower the demand for these minerals. And a lot of them are happening already without even people like environmentalists pushing for it. The car companies and the tech companies and the battery companies are aware of the shortages and the issues around some of these minerals. One of the most contentious is cobalt. One of the reasons it's contentious is because in the Congo, they use child forced labor. That's a horrible thing that companies do not want to associate themselves with. So you have auto companies from Ford to Tesla and onward that are testing new battery chemistries, looking for new types of batteries that rely less on the most contentious of these minerals and also last longer, are recyclable, and can build a continuous, basically circular economy of the battery goes out, is used by the consumer, comes back into the battery factory, and then all the parts are reused. And different companies are looking at this from different angles. Some are looking to completely isolate themselves from these so-called critical minerals and looking at chemistries that don't rely on them at all. Others are looking at how to make them last longer, how to make them more sustainable, and how to make them more recyclable. And this is where we should be putting our energy, into this kind of R&D, not into basically a new gold rush that will come at the consequence of destroying large swaths of the ocean.
Yeah, I think we need to change our thinking because now I believe there's something like 1.5 billion cars on the planet, which is equal in number to the livestock, cattle and cows on the planet. And we can't surely be thinking of replacing those cars with 1.5 billion electric cars. I mean, cars spend 90 to 95% of their time just sitting in a garage or in a parking spot. We could run our society off 5 or 10% of the numbers of cars quite easily with car sharing, et cetera. I think we need to start really seriously thinking about doing away with personal car ownership. I could see that sort of thing starting in Scandinavian countries, perhaps, and then spreading when people realize how good it can be with no traffic on the roads and much cheaper costs of transportation, et cetera. Now, the International Seabed Authority, do you know how long they've been around? And if they're just granting licenses left, right, and center, are they really a sort of neutral UN authority, or are they sort of beholden to mining companies already to be granting these licenses? Is there money sliding under tables and things like that? Like, why are they allowing all this exploration to occur, I guess?
So they've existed since the mid-90s. They were formed by one of the implementing agreements to the UN Law of the Sea. They're referred to as UN associated. They're not actually part of the UN network of agencies. They are an independent organization that was established through a UN treaty. And as such, they are not subject to regulatory oversight by UN headquarters, which is problematic when you get a secretariat there that is acting in sort of a rogue way. And there's no other way to reel them in other than the membership, which are the countries. As an entity itself, it is not supposed to be an entity that represents industry. It is supposed to be an entity that represents its members, which are the countries of the world, and it is supposed to be an entity that represents the common heritage of humankind. So under the law of the sea, the international seabed is considered common heritage of humankind, meaning that it belongs to every person in the world, and so that any economic activity that is derived from the seabed should benefit everyone in the world. And one of the challenges to creating the regulatory framework is that when you talk about opening up deep sea mining, there needs to be some kind of financial mechanism that gives dividends to inland developing nations in Africa, for example, that it's not just rich in the global north. But unfortunately, what we've seen in the most recent secretariat, there's been a secretary general by the name of Michael Lodge, who, until he came in, it was kind of a backwater agency that not many people knew about. It was kind of a private membership club where the same bureaucrats would go year after year and slowly talk about developing these regulations at a snail pace that was taking decades and decades and decades. Michael Lodge came in, and from what it looks like from the outside, took it on as his personal sort of life challenge to be the one that would launch deep sea mining as a commercial industry. And he lit a fire and urged countries to adopt stricter deadlines for the negotiations to end. He added additional meetings on and days onto the existing schedule of meetings so that they would get more done in a single year. And without wanting to say something accusatory, from external viewpoints, it greatly appears that he is pro-industry and tied to industry. He does a lot of things that favors industry more than it does the process, or more than it does the members, and more than it does the environment. He has gone on to the very mining ships, taken pictures with the CEOs of these mining companies. And there was an expose in the New York Times last year where it was revealed that one of the most aggressive deep sea mining companies, the metals company, was given backdoor data to be able to select the most nodule-rich patches of the Pacific, and made introductions with the right Pacific Island nations that they could secure the licenses through.
Yeah. It's basically the fox in charge of the hen house. It reminds me exactly of another, in quotes, UN organization or international organization called the International Maritime Organization, the IMO, who single-handedly decided, let's take sulfur out of shipping fuels in 2015 down to 3.5% content, in 2020 down to 0.5%. And as a result, we're getting tremendous warming over the oceans where those ships go, because that sulfur acts as a cloud condensation nuclei, creating low-level clouds, blocking sunlight. So it's unintended consequences which affect the entire planet. It sounds like a similar thing with this organization. So the more awareness that we can give to the world about these sort of operations, maybe it increases our chances of stopping them. You mentioned Norway and Oslo. I think Oslo, the Norwegian government is looking at mining the seafloor in the Arctic region. And that's enabled, of course, by a lack of Arctic sea ice, which is rapidly going. So I think 25% of the world's fossil fuel reserves are possibly under the seafloor in the Arctic. And now we've got Norway looking for minerals. Can you expand a bit more on what their government is looking at? Because we see Norwegians as a good country from a green point of view, right? So this sort of flies in the face of that. If this is what if they actually want to mine the seas north of Norway, and I would argue maybe they have to do it really fast, because if the AMOC continues to slow down, Norway could drop 20 degrees Celsius mean annual temperature and go into a deep freeze. And ice will spread across the Arctic over to European countries if the AMOC continues to slow down and shut down.
They're racing against time in the wrong direction, right?
Yeah, exactly, precisely. So, like, there's a word, karma, maybe. But I thought Norway they were part of the good guys, and now you're saying that they're going to be mining.
The nice, clean like Trump thinks, nice, clean people, white people. Let's have. But Norway has been exporting coal right, and oil and stuff. And they look clean in their own environment, but the rest of the world is polluted by their exports. So they're not as squeaky clean.
I mean, they are one of the country leaders for electric car usage, right?
Yeah, we've noticed the same thing. They go to these big international conservation conferences and make very bold commitments for the environment, and they like to appear as the champion for conservation and for oceans. And then they turn around, and this isn't the only thing that they've done that flies in the face of that public image that they would like to have out there. But another thing to note about the Norway case is they're not looking at nodules. The area that they're looking at on the northern part of their coast are extinct hydrothermal vents. So these are actually more similar to ore on land. These are embedded mineral deposits that would take heavy extractive techniques, heavy extraction similar to mountaintop removal on land, but under the ocean. So you're talking about a much more invasive technique with much more impact on the surrounding environment. Right now, just to be fair, it is at the exploration phase. Their Congress has approved exploration, not yet approved commercial licenses. But from what I understand from my Norwegian colleagues, there is a suite of startup mining companies lining up to be a part of this and ready to go, and industry ready, and creating the machines now in anticipation that they're going to be able to do this in a few years.
Yeah, I've taught oceanography courses for several years at University of Ottawa, and when bringing up these nodules, they were always called manganese nodules. I guess manganese is one of the most common, highest percentage metal in many of these, but I'm sure that's what you're talking about with the nodules. And so maybe you mentioned in some of the literature from your website, etc. I've seen the company Deep Green mentioned. I've seen the metals company you said is quite a big player. They're a Canadian company. Are there some others that come to mind? Because I don't know anything about it. It's the first time hearing about it. So I'm knocking Norway, right? And Canada.
Yeah. Canada. Well, all countries are looking at it, right? There's this is a massive water grab.
Well, it's like
one of the things that I thought was really interesting about it is that in the International Seabed Authority said that it should be for all mankind. And now the Canadian company goes to Nauru and says, okay, we'll buy your rights and we'll fly your flag, and so it doesn't actually benefit all humanity, but there's like this way of getting around that, what was intended to be a humanitarian law. This is another form of greenwashing in a way.
Yeah, and I mean, there's huge numbers of Canadian mining companies, like conventional mining companies. In fact, some of the over-the-counter stock markets were built mostly on mining companies and oil companies, right? So Canada is deep into this, and most Canadians would have no idea that this company exists, and this is what they're planning to try to do, mine the deep sea. So this is a fairly new topic, I think, for a lot of our listeners. So it's very thank you so much for coming on. It's very interesting.
Well, this brings up the question of where should people take action? What are the actions that are happening, and how can people help with this campaign?
Well, do you mind if I answer the Canada question, just so that people of Canada could be able to respond to this? Canada has had a long history of involvement in this. The company that was the one looking at mining in Papua New Guinea in 2008. That was a Canadian company called Nautilus that eventually collapsed, but involved a lot of the same players that are now in the metals company. You mentioned Deep Green. That was just the previous name of the metals company. They changed their name from Deep Green to the metals company. They're based in Vancouver, but my understanding is there's not an actual physical office. There's just a mailbox, and all the executives work from remote office and meet who knows where. The other Canadian company, or it's a US/Canadian company, they have headquarters in both countries, is a startup called Impossible Metals, which I understand is looking at trying to get licenses to mine in the EEZ of Hawaii, and American Samoa seems to be their aspiration. And they're developing some new technology that no one else has, which makes them sort of an interesting player.
To learn more about our progress toward a lower impact and more economical solution for critical metals, visit the Impossible Metals website to sign up for our newsletter and check out our social media pages.
And then beyond that, there's, I would say, the other big companies in the world that Greenpeace is paying attention to is GSR Deem, which is based in Belgium and Germany. And then there's a company called Allseas, which is the partner of the metals company that is based in Netherlands and Switzerland. And then there's something called Loke Minerals. which is based in Norway, and they're actually more interested in the Pacific mining than they are the Norwegian mining. They also have a subsidiary in the UK, which is the UK contractor, which would be the company that would mine on behalf of the UK if the UK ever started mining in the Pacific.
Okay, so we're talking
Greenpeace
about
has a campaign. Before we close, I'd like to make sure that we get some airtime to the campaign that Greenpeace is running and to recommendations for how people can support that.
I think because this is an industry that has not launched yet, and it is more in the hands of governments than it is in industry at this moment, it's really about political pressure right now. It's really about contacting your Congress people, the president of your country, the ministries that are involved in the negotiations. In the U.S., that's the Department of State and NOAA. Usually it's either like an environmental ministry or an ocean ministry if a country has or the kind of foreign affairs that does this negotiating. But really, a lot of times the bureaucrats will do what they're told, regardless of the pressure you put on them. You really need to put the pressure on the heads of state to take a position for a moratorium. We're calling for a moratorium, which is a timeout that would allow science to catch up with the industry. We have not set a particular time frame on it, but basically the idea is that we would just stop this process of fast tracking deep sea mining and allow science to come to fruition to show the full range of impacts, the full diversity of life at sea. We do have a petition on the Greenpeace website that you could sign that would go to your country's leaders. It is a nation by nation petition. That's the easiest thing you can do, but you can do a lot more. Picking up the phone and talking to elected officials directly is much more effective if you have the time than just signing a petition.
Great. Okay, well, we hope people will do those things, and we thank you, Arlo, for being on our program today. This has been very helpful, as Paul says. This has really helped people understand this much better. So thank you both.
Thank you.
Thank you.